Looking overseas, Joe Biden is marking his 100th day as US President, and he sprinted through signing a $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill into law and issuing more executive orders so far than his three predecessors.
His administration has also delivered 200 million COVID-19 vaccinations, and these moves have resulted in a positive and steady approval rating for the president.
Our US Bureau Chief is standing by to take stock of Mr. Biden's 100 days. But first, on the eve of that milestone, in a speech to a joint session of Congress, he proposed a sweeping new $1.8 trillion plan.
And to help pay for it, he pleaded with lawmakers on both sides to agree to raise taxes on corporations and wealthy Americans.
Mr. Biden argued that his proposals represent a once-in-a-generation investment vital to the country's future and necessary to keep up with China.
We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy.
Well, Mr. Biden also called on Congress to pass police reforms, and he wanted this done by the anniversary of the killing of George Floyd, which falls on May the 25th.
It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death.
But all eyes were on the women behind Mr. Biden. Even before he began his speech, Vice President Kamala Harris and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the dais, the first time in U.S. history that two women sat behind the president.
The Straits Times' U.S. Bureau Chief Nirmal Ghosh is here to discuss Mr. Biden's Congress address and his first 100 days as president. So, Nirmal, what were the most important points that Mr. Biden brought up in his congressional address?
Well, right at the outset, it was hugely symbolic, one has to say, that behind him as he spoke and on either side were two women for the first time ever in the history of the American presidency. And those were, of course, Vice President Kamala Harris and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. So, of course, President Biden brought up the pandemic. He urged all Americans to get vaccinated. As we know, even as vaccinations pick up, there is still vaccine skepticism. So he made that pitch. He spoke about the need to compete and how nobody should bet against America, that Americans can do anything if they decide to do it together. That was in the context of the pain that America has been through with this pandemic and with political and racial divisions, but also in the context of competition with China. China is closing in, he said, and significantly he said that he had told President Xi Jinping in their phone call that America will compete, but he does not want conflict, that he in fact wants to prevent conflict. He made a long and strong pitch for raising taxes on the wealthy. He cited a lot of data on that, including a study that shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid zero in federal income tax last year. No federal taxes on more than $40 billion in profits. And he stressed that the 2017 tax cuts had basically benefited the rich, and it is time to close that gap. And he spoke about social justice as well, about the need to enhance controls on guns. But the big message was that the challenges call for a new era of government spending. and that government is a force for good, not some hostile entity thousands of miles away. The government is us, he said. It is we, the people. This is very significant, as we know, because distrust of the federal government runs very deep. It is part of the DNA of the United States. So on that theme, he made a strong pitch for a vast expansion of social safety nets, educational programs, promising that the government will create jobs and opportunities for those left behind. He said trickle-down economics never worked. It wasn't Wall Street that built America, it was the middle class, and it was unions that built the middle class. So it was a pitch to blue-collar America, really, in the hope that there will be common ground. And he also stressed that America must prove that democracy still works, that its government still works, and it can deliver for the American people.
As in usual practice, the other party delivers a response, and in this case we saw Senator Tim Scott, the only black GOP senator, follow up with a speech. What do you make of it? Did it signal a building or mending of bridges between Republicans and Democrats?
Well, in short, no. The two sides could not be further apart still. Senator Tim Scott was a good choice. As you said, he is a rising star. He's black. He has a compelling personal story, raised by a single mother. He dwelt on that. And he is the Republican foil to arguments that there is racism in America. He hammered Joe Biden's infrastructure plan as too broad. He said Joe Biden is driving the nation further apart, that he supports abortion, that he believes Americans are racist when they are not, that he has weakened the southern border, that his plans to raise taxes will kill jobs. He said the coronavirus is on the run and it is time to get back to normal schooling for children, to normal life, and so forth. So pretty much the opposite of everything Joe Biden said, or to put it another way, that everything Joe Biden said was wrong, basically.
Nirmal, of course, Mr. Biden's address in Congress was primarily for Americans, but it also has global impact and resonance. And so what should non-Americans take from what Mr. Biden said earlier today?
Right. So Joe Biden's strategy is to rebuild America at home, which will strengthen America globally. That is the theory. But he wants to build back better, to use his phrase. He wants to retool America to deal with the crises of our times, the pandemic, of course, and climate change, and also great power competition with China and Russia. And he is a believer in America's alliances. He mentioned that as well. He wants to project strength in order to avoid conflict. And America can only do that if it is not divided at home, if it is strong and cohesive at home. So he wants to project strength abroad, but not in a reckless manner, rather in a more measured manner. He has restored an element of traditional diplomatic engagement. And he's also a believer in the idea of America, in principles. He mentioned that as well, which is why human rights is back at the center of policy, both at home and abroad.
Let's take stock, Nirmal. Let's take a wider look at Mr. Biden's first 100 days. In terms of following through with campaign promises, in what areas did he meet those targets? And at the same time as well, where did he fall short?
Well, he has succeeded, of course, in accelerating the vaccine rollout, which is a big thing. He did succeed in his COVID relief measure that put $1,400 in the bank accounts of lower income Americans. He drove that through the Senate using the one-vote majority. He has fallen short on promises to raise the minimum wage, but that is an ongoing project, given the slim majorities they have in Congress. Raising the minimum wage, raising taxes on the wealthy, all this will have to be negotiated. He is falling short on gun control, but frankly, that is also to be expected. That is also an ongoing project. He, of course, returned the US to the WHO, the World Health Organization, as promised, and to the Paris Climate Accord. He halted troop withdrawals from Germany, and he has enforced America's key alliances, which is what he promised to do. The one big promise to heal a divided nation remains a challenge, and there is a long way to go. The nation remains severely divided, and that is going to remain a problem. He has less than 2 years in which to push through his agenda and show results. Most importantly, politically, to show more jobs and economic growth. Now, the IMF has said America will grow 6% in the rebound from the pandemic. But if it does not, then he will have problems to deal with, because around this time next year, focus will shift to the midterm elections, in which the incumbent party normally loses seats. So he himself personally doesn't have to care much about re-election in 2024. He's 78 years old, and he has positioned himself as a transitional president, and now he is positioning or trying to be a transformational president. But he has, again, less than 2 years to do it in a country where even if his approval rating is fairly good, and it is running at 53% or over, again, it remains severely divided ideologically between left and right, between liberal and conservative, between urban and rural. Very deep divisions.
Thanks for the insights, Nirmal. Nirmal Ghosh, our U.S. Bureau Chief in Washington, D.C.
He's written several stories as part of the Straits Times' coverage of Mr. Biden's 100 days. That's in today's paper.